バタ先生のフルネームは何ですかね？
小畑チューラ。我々祖先が教えました偉大なる教え。自然に逆らわないで、自然と共に始終any where any circumstance 感謝の念を持っていくということを私は自分のエイムとしています。
Obata's story is important to Yosemite because of the artistic contribution that he made, but also the writings and the teachings he did that were inspired by his experience in Yosemite and were about Yosemite, and also were just about nature in general, great nature specifically. But I think it's even more than that. It's that he is one of very few artists of color that we associate with the park. It's that he's one of very few people of color whose story that we tell here.
In my own work as a teacher, I have been involved in researching the most important contributions to our California art historical story. And we can see today, there's no question that one of the tallest giants is Chiura Obata. Not only for the distinctness of his vision, but the fact that he was so successful in his career. And it's interesting that he was almost forgotten after his death, but because his archive was saved, we are able to appreciate it today again. Anew.
When I look at Obata's artwork and his writings, this phrase daishisen, and he would translate it great nature, just starts to appear in his lectures or his writing around the time that he returned from the Yosemite trip in 1927. And I think that experience really gelled for him what his inspiration and his philosophy toward what he wanted to express. And it wasn't just learn from nature, it was great nature, and yet having a personal experience with it was so moving to him.
1927年の6月に私はユニバーシティカリフォルニアの家の教授をしているオース・ライダーという教授と親友でありまして、それから彫刻家のロバート・ハーワードという3人でセーラーネバダの連山に約2ヶ月のキャンプ生活をやりました。それが非常に私の将来にまた修士を通して非常に絵の上に大なる収穫を与えたんです。
Because Obata's artwork is basically landscapes and depicting scenery not in an abstract way. Some of his paintings do tend to be a little more abstract. What he was attempting to do then, I think, was in being reverent to great nature. This is what I saw, this is what I felt. And being able to put that on paper in an image, either black and white or in color. That was his goal.
When he talks about great nature, capital G, capital N, I think of Japanese Shintoism, where it believes that everything has a spirit. And so when we talk about really connecting to great nature, to Daishi Zen, I really imagine connecting like how you would to a person, not how we traditionally in the West think that you might connect to a tree or a rock. And when we can shift our mind, we could walk through a totally new Yosemite, or like wherever you are. Walking by the tree that you've walked by 100 times, all of a sudden it can be a new tree to you. You know, I first visited Yosemite in 2010, and it wasn't until 2014 that I'd even heard about Obata. And as a Japanese American, when I did hear about him, it was huge for me. I didn't realize before that I had felt like a stranger in a strange land, but I knew that I had been feeling that way because when I heard about Obata, I didn't feel that way anymore. And for that reason, I think it really serves the national park to make a greater effort of telling these stories for, you know, whatever percentage of the population might feel like I felt. Obata's story and relevance to Yosemite is already so rich at this point, and it's also still just the beginning of his story. Because on December 7th in 1941, things would change for Japanese Americans in a profoundly tragic way.
For Obata, from the very first day, he realizes he needs to do something to help his people.
He developed this idea to start art schools and working with some of the other preeminent artists from the period like Masusaburo Hibi and Mine Okubo, who had great reputations already in the Bay Area. They created this inspirational art school that became something that had an incredible legacy, and there are such wonderful artworks that came from camp that are such an important part of our American story.
He, along with his co-founder, created a school that had 13 plus teachers, served 600 students. He gathered supplies for all of those classes and participants, and was just a huge undertaking amidst this craziness. And so the fact that he was also able to organize these schools was just so impressive to me, and speaks to the great amount of compassion and care that he had for his community, and also in particular the children that he was thinking of, is what will they do while they're at these camps?
Some of his paintings that he did of camp, one of my favorite ones is this moon in the middle of the painting. And to me, he's saying that that's what's important. That's your spirit, your hope, that will always endure. And these barracks down here at the bottom of the painting and these clouds, they're all gonna pass. And what is essential to always hold on to is your sense of self and your hope for the future. Even in the face of this very grave injustice. Nature is there for me if I look and I find it, no matter where he was. He wanted also his students within the camps to be open to what nature could provide. So, part of what they did in the actual classes in the camps was to paint scenery or some flowers or plants that were brought in, and that relationship, the hand and the eye coordination, and just calming down and being somehow in a closer relationship to nature, even for that brief moment, that would help people try to survive what was happening to them and give them dignity. You can't do art without dignity. In creating art in the creative process, then you also create more dignity for yourself. What I appreciate about learning about my grandfather's philosophy, how he taught, he said, go with nature. Find your relationship to nature, but he said, do it on your own. Do it where it's quiet. Find a quiet place in nature, and you can grow and you can learn. It's a personal experience.
Creating art in national parks on its sort of pragmatic and historical context is that it's part of an important lineage, legacy of protection of the parks. The way that Yosemite was first protected was through the art that was created here, then sent to Congress, and thus convinced them that this was a place protecting in perpetuity. But I think what is more important to me is the connection that we gain by creating art on the individual level. So the artist comes here and creates art, and doing so connects to this place. And that connection creates a relationship. And that relationship then moves one towards, caring, right? And then caring can then lead to stewardship and action and protection. And yeah, that sounds like I just want you to eventually get to the part where you're taking care of Yosemite, and that is important, but you're doing it out of love, out of actual care, and that is really the most important part, because that's not just beneficial to Yosemite, that's beneficial to you